We spend a tremendous amount of time analyzing the absolute cutting edge of silicon. The M-series Max and Ultra chips, the multi-thousand-dollar workstations that can render complex 3D environments or compile massive codebases while barely breaking a sweat. But according to reliable sources, Apple's most dangerous upcoming product does not have a Pro label anywhere near it. What we are looking at is the MacBook Neo2, slated for an early spring 2027 release. And I will tell you right now, this is not just another minor entry-level refresh. This is a highly calculated, aggressive move to completely monopolize the affordable laptop market. For those of us who have watched the tech industry evolve over the last few decades, this represents a fascinating pivot. Apple is historically a premium-first company, rarely venturing into the true budget sector. However, the original Neo lineup proved there was a massive, untapped appetite for Apple's build quality and operating system without the exorbitant Apple tax. Now, the Neo2 is aiming to turn that initial appetite into a full-blown feast. What's interesting here is not just that they are making a cheaper laptop, but precisely how they are engineering it and what it ultimately means for the rest of the industry. Let's separate the real leaks from the noise, starting with the very brains of the operation. Supply chain rumblings strongly indicate that Apple is ditching the traditional desktop-class M-series architecture entirely for this specific machine. Instead, they are reportedly dropping in the A19 Pro processor. Yes, the exact same silicon lineage that will power their flagship smartphones. Now, if you've been around the block, you might immediately scoff at the idea of a mobile phone processor running a proper, full-sized computer. It reminds me of the early netbook era, where manufacturers crammed hopelessly underpowered Atom processors into tiny plastic shells, marketed them as laptops, and called it a day. But the A19 Pro is an entirely different beast. We are hearing consistent whispers that this chip approaches the raw computational throughput of some earlier M-series Max chips, but it operates within a fraction of the thermal envelope. Think about the real-world implications of that engineering feat. We are talking about desktop-grade responsiveness, near-instant application launches, and surprisingly robust localized AI processing capabilities, all generated by a chip originally designed to run passively cooled in your pocket. By porting this highly efficient architecture over to a laptop chassis with significantly more thermal headroom and a vastly larger battery array, Apple is effectively creating a machine that punches ridiculously above its weight class. But a fast processor is completely bottlenecked if it does not have the runway to operate, which brings us to the memory configuration. This is perhaps the most crucial detail for the long-term viability of the machine. The MacBook Neo2 is heavily rumored to finally establish a new baseline of 12 GB of unified memory. For years, Apple has stubbornly clung to 8 GB for its entry-level machines, a financial decision that has aged about as well as dial-up internet. Bumping the floor to 12 GB might initially seem like a modest concession, but it is actually a strict strategic necessity. The impending rollouts of advanced Apple Intelligence and subsequent deep-level macOS machine learning tasks are incredibly memory-hungry. These localized AI models reportedly require that specific 12 GB threshold just to run efficiently in the background without constantly paging to the internal SSD and subsequently destroying your battery life. For the experienced professional who might be considering this as a lightweight secondary travel laptop, or buying one for a family member heading off to university, this memory bump is everything. It ensures the machine will not feel hopelessly obsolete in 2 years. It provides the necessary breathing room for heavy web browsing, massive spreadsheet parsing, and keeping a dozen applications suspended without the entire system grinding to a frustrating halt. Of course, Apple is not known for simply giving away performance and memory for free. To balance the corporate ledger and keep the retail pricing aggressively low, they have to cut costs somewhere in the production pipeline. According to reliable sources, that somewhere is the external tooling and manufacturing process. The MacBook Neo2 will reportedly utilize the exact same aluminum unibody chassis as the current outgoing generation. There will be no radical physical redesigns, no new experimental ports, and certainly no expensive OLED screen upgrades. They are taking the existing highly proven shell and simply swapping out the engine block. And honestly, that is a remarkably smart compromise. Those of us who remember the classic unibody MacBook Pros from the late 2000s know that when Apple strikes gold with a physical design, they will happily ride it out for years. The current aluminum chassis is already miles ahead of the creaky plastic hinges, flexing keyboards, and hollow-sounding trackpads found on similarly priced Windows machines. By completely eliminating the massive research, development, and retooling costs associated with fabricating a brand new physical design, Apple can afford to heavily subsidize the internal silicon and memory upgrades. It is a brilliant logistical maneuver. You still get the premium glass trackpad experience, the reliable keyboard mechanism, and the solid, cold aluminum feel, but the financial resources have been cleverly redirected to where they actually matter: system longevity and daily performance. Let's talk about endurance, because this is where the A19 Pro Chip's mobile DNA truly flexes its muscles and shows its value. Early projections are pointing toward an astonishing 15 hours of real-world active battery life, And I do not mean 15 hours of staring at a blank text document with the screen brightness turned down to 0. I mean actual usable Wi-Fi connected longevity. Back in the early days of wireless internet, if a laptop gave you a solid 3 hours away from a wall outlet, you considered yourself lucky and packed the power brick anyway. Today, the Neo 2 is shaping up to be a true, uncompromised all-day machine. For professionals constantly moving between client meetings, airport lounges, or anyone who simply hates being tethered to a charging cable on the couch, a genuine 15-hour runtime is a massive quality-of-life upgrade. It fundamentally changes how you interact with the device. The charger essentially becomes an afterthought, left at home on the desk while the laptop goes to the office or the coffee shop. All of these technical details, from the unified memory to the thermal efficiency, build toward the single most disruptive rumor of all, the price tag. Multiple credible supply chain sources are currently pointing to a starting price of around $599. Let that sink in for a moment, $599. And it gets even more aggressive when you factor in traditional educational discounts, which could realistically bring this machine closer to the $499 mark for eligible students. At that specific price point, Apple is not just casually competing with entry-level Windows laptops, they are effectively wiping them off the map. If you are a consumer looking at a $600 budget, the choice between a heavily compromised, poorly built budget PC and an incredibly efficient, aluminum-clad MacBook with 12 gigs of RAM and 15 hours of battery life is not a choice at all. It is a complete no-brainer. So what is the catch? As always, we have to look past the marketing fluff. While the A19 Pro will be phenomenally snappy for burst tasks, opening heavy applications, browsing media-rich websites, and general multitasking, it is still fundamentally a passively cooled chip. If you try to export a massive multi-track 4K video timeline or run complex 3D rendering software, it is inevitably going to thermal throttle. This is undeniably not a machine for heavy, sustained professional workloads, but Apple knows that 90% of consumers, and even most traveling executives, never push their machines to those extreme limits anyway. This could actually matter because it forces us to reevaluate our long-held purchasing habits. It begs a very serious, practical question. Why automatically drop $2,000 on a heavy, thick MacBook Pro if a $600 Neo 2 can handle your daily workflow without breaking a sweat? Apple is quietly building a Trojan horse, delivering unprecedented, undeniable value at the very bottom of their lineup to capture long-term ecosystem loyalty. It is a mature, calculated strategy, and it is going to be incredibly difficult for competitors to counter in any meaningful way. I'm very curious to hear your take on this aggressive new market positioning. Does a $599 highly efficient MacBook change the calculus for your next hardware purchase, or do your specific daily tasks still require the brute force and active cooling of the true Pro lineup? Drop your detailed thoughts down in the comments below. I always enjoy reading your perspectives. If you appreciate this kind of calm, realistic approach to hardware leaks, consider hitting the like button and subscribing. We will keep tracking these supply chain movements closely as we head toward the 2027 launch window.